everybody. This is a fantastic panel of Women in Open. We're so grateful to Delia, Kaitlin, Jennie, Leela. It's so lovely to see you here. Well, it's evening for me, but it's morning for some of you, and early morning for Delia. So thank you all of you for participating in this, and I'm going to hand over to Delia, who's going to take the reins and guide the discussion. Take care.
Oh, thanks very much, Catherine, and welcome everybody to this session, which we're kind of celebrating and talking about issues for Women in Open. And I'd like to introduce our special guests, who all have had some of us being long-serving and long-standing members of the community and involved in Creative Commons. My name's Delia Brown. I'm the National Copyright Director of the School and TAFE sector in Australia and a board member of Creative Commons, and also long-serving with the Global Network and the organisation for many, many, many years. But before I start, I'm actually calling in from Sydney, Australia here today, and I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which I'm on. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders, past, future, and emerging, and extend a welcome and a respect to all Aboriginal people who might be participating and viewing today's session. So welcome, everybody. So I'll just run around and have everyone do a quick intro of themselves. Kaitlin, can I get you to start first, please?
You bet. Thanks, Delia. I'm Kaitlin Thaney. I currently am the executive director of an organization called Invest in Open Infrastructure. I started off at Creative Commons 2006 to help build out the applications to science and research. We were based over at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab under Hal Abelson, and really were there sort of at the beginning of some of the implementation of CC in the open access and open data space. And, really proud to be back here for the Global Summit. The work that we do for Invest in Open Infrastructure is around helping support funders and those looking to adopt open tools and services in service of research and scholarship. So very much carrying forward much of the sort of infrastructure and also accessibility elements that Creative Commons instilled ages ago. Been a longstanding supporter of this space and have gone on to work in other open organizations, also with some of the individuals here, some esteemed colleagues from Creative Commons and also from Mozilla, where we shared time with Jennie. And also prior to IOI was the endowment director at Wikimedia, where we just hit, I believe, the $100 million mark this week for a fund in perpetuity to support Wikimedia in the open knowledge space. So thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Welcome, welcome. Leela, darling heart.
Hello. Oh my goodness. It is. I just honestly, when I was asked to be on this panel, I was just like, are you like, this is going to be the most fun hour of my week, just to get to hang out with you amazing women. So I am just so delighted and honored, and this is just absolutely wonderful. So for those of you who don't know me already, Leela Bailey. I currently am the Senior Policy Counsel at the Internet Archive. Our mission is to enable universal access to all knowledge. I've been privileged to be working with Jennie. I just got to meet her this year on a lot of projects together in the library and GLAM space, and that has just been super exciting. My origin story, I guess you could say, I'm not even gonna go there. I'll just say I worked at Creative Commons from like 2008 to 2010. I was hired as counsel for CC Learn, which was the Internet Archive's education division when there was a thing such as divisions in Creative Commons. I just had a really great experience there working with Arash Bissell and Jane Park and Alex Kozak and everybody. And it was just really one of the highlights of my career. And I got to meet Delia at that point. So anyway, it just kind of and Kaitlin too, like we overlapped a bit. So yeah, I feel like I met a whole bunch of people around the world at that time through the global network of attorneys, mostly, were the ones that I was working with. And I still count many of you. I'm hoping, I can't see who's here, but I'm assuming many of you are actually here on this call. And just, I'm so thrilled to be a part of that community still to this day.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And Jennie, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. So I guess I'm last. My name is Jenny Halperin, and I'm the Executive Director of Library Futures. And I was so excited when I just signed on. We have an open community Slack, which if anybody is interested in joining. And when we signed on, I literally just posted about 15 minutes ago that Senator Ron Wyden just announced an investigation into publishing practices due to advocacy on the part of our organization at Library Futures. It was the best surprise to happen 10 minutes before this panel. So Library Futures is a new organization. We've been launched for about 10 months. And we work on digital access to knowledge, particularly from the library space. So we're interested in equitable access. We're interested in the ways in which libraries can be empowered to own digital objects, to build collections of digital objects, and can be empowered to stand up to many of the forces that in publishing that are holding us back from being able to realize a full ideal access space for libraries, archives, museums, and also for galleries. And so for me, before that, I was at Harvard Law School Library as the Assistant Outreach Director. But my sort of big moment where I know all of you, except Leela, who I met this year, is through my work with Creative Commons and Mozilla. For me, I started working on this when I was in my early 20s. At Columbia University, I helped run and create what we were calling the first open access folk music archive, and worked in the musicology department. It was the first open access American folk music archive. It was a large collection of music. And I learned a lot through that project, and then went to graduate school in information and library science. But I never really found my community until I got involved with Mozilla right after graduate school and their global community, and started to really understand how important and vibrant a global community of open advocates there really is. And I've been just thrilled to have this as my vocation and sometimes my avocation for almost 10 years now, and to have really had the opportunity to meet so many wonderful people and wonderful communities, and also had the opportunity to travel around the world in support of this work. So thank you to Catherine for inviting me to this panel. I am honored to literally stand with all of these women, and I'm excited for this conversation as well.
Oh, that's fabulous, because it is about a global community and a community of like-minded people and meeting new people and opening our own sort of views and eyes of the world. I mean, that's one of the things. It is a real family, I feel. I'm just going to give a general question out, and we'll probably start with you this time, Jennie. I'm going to mix it up a bit, so just be like your buzzers on a game show. How do you think your time at CC shaped the kind of organisation that you work with now and the work that you're doing now?
Oof. Well, first off, CC was the first real job that I had in communications and in strategic communications in particular. I actually worked in publishing for a company before that, in a digital publishing company. And I remember when I started to go work for CC, my old boss said, "Oh, well, I actually can't think of a better fit than that." Because I'd always been interested in Creative Commons and the issues around it, but I had never really known where to dive in. And so for me, I got to meet a lot of new people. I really got a sense of what it means to nurture and cultivate community work. A lot of the work that I do is driven by my external work as a facilitator and an organizer. And I learned so much over the course of my 4 or so years there both in terms of how to run communications, how to talk about open, as well as mostly through the people I met and the communities I was able to connect with. And also, frankly, I learned so much about the law, like so much about copyright law, more than I think a person who frequently uses the acronym IANAL, I'm not a lawyer, maybe should, and really got pretty deep into the copyright nerd world, and was really able to make the connection between copyright and social justice. In addition, for me, the concept of the commons is an animating feature of what I think about and what I do and my academic work. I am fascinated by cooperative work, by commoning, and I do think that my time with and relationship with Creative Commons really brought me into conversation with commoners, with the concept of the commons, and helped me really learn that a commons is tended and that it's cultivated and that it's a way of producing community outcomes that are really visionary and envision the world that we want to see, which is, I think, kind of the last thing for me at CC, is that CC is a vision of a world that we want to see. It's not just the licenses, it's not just this one thing. And so for me, staying in this community has really shaped my worldview, as well as shaped my leadership, I hope, for the organization that I'm now really privileged to help run.
Oh, that's an amazing kind of response, Jenny. That's fantastic. Leela, I'm going to go with you next. What did your time at CC shape you in kind of work you're doing now?
So I think a lot of my thinking echoes Jenny's. I guess I will say, as a lawyer, one of the things that I did learn was the importance of human readability of legal documents, right? And how truly challenging that is, how to communicate really complex legal ideas in simple, boiled down language that anybody can understand, maybe even just through literally an icon and not reading any words at all. And I think the incredible achievement of CC licenses is that ability for really anybody to grasp onto what truly is. I mean, like, as somebody who, I've done nothing but copyright law my whole career, and I probably still only know like a very tiny sliver of everything there is to know about copyright law. So truly those licenses and the whole idea of it being machine readable and human readable, it really was revolutionary, and hasn't been matched by anybody, any other organization. And so I will say, like that concept of really being able to translate super complex legal information into something really digestible for anyone was probably one of the most important things I learned. I will say also just the power of a network is the other really big thing. And I would say, like, again, to this day, there is almost nothing I do. I'm trying to think of even one thing that I do for the Internet Archive that is not done in coalition with, hundreds of other people, many of whom I met, through Creative Commons, or who have come into my life from sort of the open world. So I think that I really came to believe and understand, it's difficult to work in community. Things don't happen quickly necessarily. But when we are able to come together and have a common vision and a common mission and work together towards it, that we really can achieve incredible things. And so I guess I also just have like a really strong sense of optimism at my ability to impact the world, because I know I am part of this network. And I just really believe that we are. Bye, Zelda. I really believe in our power to change things for the better. And it makes me feel personally empowered by being a member of such an incredible group of people who are so passionate. And so I think that really has just guided my work ever since working at Creative Commons.
Excellent. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I can really, relate to that a lot. Kaitlin, how's your time at CC shaped what you're doing now?
Oh, I think, to build on the answers that Jennie and Leela have shared, I definitely would echo the broader network, especially the knowledge of intellectual property. I think at one point, Mike Carroll and Jamie Boyle told me, do not go to law school for IP because you'll undo the things we've taught you and you're not going to get any better. If you're listening, Mike and Jamie, thank you for that. So there's a slightly different tack I would take. So Science Commons, I was working with Hal Abelson as Science Commons was being formed, was literally sharing an office with John Wilbanks, who is the former VP of Science. And what I don't think many people know is that, the work that we were building out initially, much of the conversation was around, okay, Creative Commons for science is going to be about articles, it's going to be about patents. And we really fundamentally, one of the first things it did is, that was brought on to do was help organize an event where we had a bit of a listening tour, the National Academies, to say, here's what we're hearing, where are you hitting bottlenecks? And at that point, recognizing that like articles and patents were still being generated, still coming out of the system. It was a broken system, but that wasn't where we might want to set our attention. And this sort of systems approach of really fundamentally, along with community, examining the complexity and also the, kind of downstream effects and the various components we needed to work on. So it was not only working on creation of things like CC0 or advocacy and working with partners to embed, licenses in line with open access at institutions and journals and with publishers, all of these sorts of elements. But it was also around how all of this fit together and thinking about the other materials, the other components, the infrastructure, so to speak, and how that interplay happened and that system approach. The phrasing that sticks out to me was sort of the multi-level chessboard that we were operating in moving that forward. And I think that it's incredibly, incredibly important for that to, and I see Francis in the chat. Hi, Francis. To not lose sight of that, because I think that the complexity and also ensuring that we weren't creating or even causing harm for other areas of the ecosystem while we were moving forward pretty radical and incredibly important work that was experimental in some form. The other point that I think is really, really key is also the work in service of community and really keeping that need front and center. So, Science Commons, we were looking at, not only being situated in Boston, in our backyard, where a number of rare and neglected disease research groups. This might not necessarily be fully known, but many of the people from that initial science team came to the work, including myself, because we had loved ones that were afflicted with rare or neglected diseases, and we were frustrated by the fact that we couldn't get access to help our friends and family. And so the initial test audience for much of the infrastructure and sharing principles that we were talking about were individuals like the ALS, Therapy Development Network, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, rare and neglected disease groups in the Institute of Medicine that were known as sort of venture philanthropy, the Chordoma Foundation, et cetera. In many cases, because they were operating under the threshold for federal funding, and they were looking to throw whatever they could at sharing whatever information could possibly help their constituents and help their populations, help their families. And so there was a really gratifying element there of making sure that the work that we were doing, which was in some cases extremely academic, very ethereal, experimental, but never losing sight of the fact that the individuals were really at the core of it. And I think that that's an element that's kept my work anchored in understanding that what we're looking to do is really impact society, help those individuals get better medical care, help those individuals get access to information that can help them learn, help them advance in society, all of those elements. And I really credit CC for instilling that at a very early age.
Wow. It's interesting, isn't it, that we all come from very, very different disciplines, but our core values are pretty much kind of common and shared across. And I think actually Creative Commons has had a role in shaping my values and all of our values in the work that we've done. Another question I'm going to ask you all is, what has surprised you the most about how this space has evolved? And I can pick on Leela. What surprised you about how the space has evolved?
I wish I had a really cheerful answer for this. It isn't that cheerful. My answer is and maybe this is my own naivete. I also worked in publishing right before I went to law school.
Before you saw the light?
Yeah. Well, I really thought that many more commercial, I just thought a lot more people would opt into the sharing economy, the sharing model of the internet. I will say, I am disappointed to see how we are still living in a world that is mostly paywalls, is mostly walled gardens, despite all of our efforts over the last 20 years. I think access to information is somewhat better, but I really truly believed, really believed when I went to law school that we were on the verge of really blowing this thing wide open, right? Really doing it. And, we're not there. We're not there. And so I think, again, maybe that was just my naivete, but there's still just a lot more work to do. And so I guess I find myself surprised at how much work we still have to do.
It's a good answer. Yeah. Jennie, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel similarly to Leela, and just wanted to kind of piggyback on something that Kaitlin said. So I also had a loved one who had a very rare autoimmune disease, and so for me, one of my real inroads into CC was knowing that my mother's disease, which I have a fairly high chance of developing in my lifetime. Most of the research for it was locked down and still is. And so when I was in graduate school and working as a cataloger in a medical library, I started to realize that, if you don't have up-to-date, if you don't have these lockdown resources, it's not only difficult to access information about science, it's also difficult to understand it. So, even with unpaywall journal articles, as a layperson, I can't necessarily say that I would understand it and that I would be able to speak the language. So one thing that CC I thought was has really been able to offer is in unlocking much of the information and content, particularly around science, open research materials, and really providing the framework and tools in which to do so. There's a larger variety of materials that's available to people. So I think, I am much more able than I was even 8-10 years ago when I started researching or looking, looking for information on this disease. I'm much more able to find information. However, a lot of the information I'm finding is still, paid content, sponsored content. It's still hard to vet. And so I want to bring up an article by Barbara Pfister, which again, I can drop in the chat during this session, that implores us to really look to the helpers, because doing your own research has become this sort of dark space, right? And so I would consider CC to be one of the helpers in many ways. And I like to hope that, the organizations that we all work with, the Internet Archive, Invest in Open Infrastructure, can really be some of the helpers that can help us get past the sort of intense platformization, the issues with knowledge lockdown, and the issues in which we find ourselves, in which we are in many ways have access to more information, but not particularly more information literate in many ways. And I am certainly not an expert on misinformation and disinformation, but one space where I really think that CC has evolved is in watching the ways in which they have really transformed the data landscape in particular, with CC0 data and open data sets. And I'm really excited. I hope this answers the question. I'm really excited to see how that space evolves, how open data sets, particularly on questions of climate and on questions of global health, can really transform the way that CC licenses are used and utilized. And also another space where I would be very excited to see CC evolve into is in questions of how can we communicate the value to people who don't necessarily want to argue over whether it's NC, ND, by zero, just want just-in-time access, and who are maybe discovering this community for the first time.
Thanks, Jenny, because you kind of now sort of gone into, and we can merge into this question next, I think, Kaitlin. I'll just do this, which is like you've talked about some areas and issues which you think need more attention going forward. And I think that's actually quite a good place for us to start veering our conversation down. So, Kaitlin, you can tell us what's most surprised you, but also why don't we start thinking about, like, what's ahead for CC when we're reflecting on 20 years, but also what issues and areas you think should demand more attention. What do we overlook? And I noticed there's a question from Francis. Hi, Francis, who asked Larry earlier today about what he would say to us about CC and the global climate crisis. So people might want to chime in onto that. But I'm just going to merge the theme that we're going forward here, because I'm just conscious that we want people to ask questions too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think both in terms of what I find most surprising and what I think also is a sticky point and really has brought up a number of different dimensions that I think warrant further examination. So I'll tell you from, early days at CC, really was an open zealot, like at the purest sense, right? As much stuff under CC0 or CC BY. I remember even joining Mozilla and really kind of butting up against Mozilla public license because it wasn't as open as like the open access, attribution license, things like that. But I will tell you, and I've shared this story with Catherine as well, I recently completely shut down and removed everything I had from Flickr. I had a very large sort of Flickr account, had moved things through, recognizing how many sort of personal images and also images of family and whatnot had been brought into Clearview AI and also were used for predictive policing. It was incredibly uncomfortable and just unjust in my mind. Now they use the licenses, appropriately. We've also seen examples where platforms have not actually cared for it based on their own agreements, whether or not you've put a license up on your content. Facebook, I'm looking at you, but also, based on the agreement that you may have with the platform. I think that there's some serious privacy implications, and also it gets into a level of what does prevention of abuse look like? What does a dimension look like that, without locking down as a default content, which is something that I remember in the early days of talking about open licenses or even waivers to get data as freely available as possible. We constantly were faced with conversations of, there was always a question or a comment at the end of a panel that would always say like, well, what if someone who's got housing information marries that with this information and they use that to keep you from getting a mortgage? What if you, and it was like, there's always going to be that mix, but at what point do you say we have to at least try to make information as openly available and look for community enforcement or look for other mechanisms for prevention of abuse? But I will say, I found myself, especially having our child, challenging a lot of my own assumptions and views about sharing information broadly. And that's a space that I sort of knew was kind of coming, but I didn't think I was going to have such a visceral response, or that there wouldn't be sort of a stopgap there. So I think it's a really fascinating element, not only in terms of privacy, but also how AI interacts with content. What does enforcement look like in those spaces? What does permissions and a safe space for sharing look like without perpetuating walled gardens? And it's a complicated area to navigate.
Yeah, and one that we are really looking at and aware of right now at the moment too. It's just becoming increasingly pervasive, isn't it? Leela, what do you, going into what sort of areas and issues do you think demand more dedicated attention? What do you think we've overlooked? Or what do we think we need going forward? Looking at more positively, maybe, than saying, what have we missed? What should we do?
Well, so I think, honestly, this is an issue that I've been working on since I was at Creative Commons, is the question of what do you do with the all rights reserved stuff that people actually really need access to? In the United States, we have fair use, and, the Internet Archive really makes the fullest use of fair use really possible. But even with that, it's very limiting, and obviously, not everywhere in the world has fair use. And so I think I still think there's a big question mark that I have around not just what do we do, but what's the ethical thing to do? What's the right thing to do in a world where we're facing climate change and income inequality and all kinds of racial equity issues and the disappearance of indigenous languages and all of these things, when we're confronted with all of that, and there's knowledge out there that could help us solve any number of those problems. And at the same time, recognizing that somebody's got to create that stuff. And there's got to be some way to sustain the creation of knowledge as well. That, I really do find myself having, kind of the big questions about what do we do? And personally, I think I would love to go back to first principles and start over on copyright. And maybe I seriously think a lot of the problems that we think of as, quote, copyright problems could be solved as labor problems. Right, because one of the big complaints is authors don't make enough money to live, and they don't have healthcare and things like that. And it's well, that doesn't seem like a copyright problem. That seems like another kind of problem altogether. So I feel like copyright has become kind of this Christmas tree in a way, where we've tried to solve so many different kinds of problems using this really, frankly, quite outdated tool. And so but shy of starting over completely on copyright, I'm curious what other folks think what we should do in that area.
Oh, I've always just thought we should blow the whole thing up and start again from scratch. This is a copyright lawyer. This is how I make my living. I'm going, it's just so broken.
So broken.
If we were actually faced with trying to set up a system that was going to, pay creators, respect creativity, give access, would we have these incredibly complex legislation which differs around the world? Would we actually, it's just every time I look at the Australian Copyright Act, when I moved to Australia in 96, it was 300 pages. It's now over 1,200. The Tax Act is actually a lovely read in comparison to the Copyright Act. Yeah. It's like reading a romance novel compared to reading the Copyright Act. But so I think that sort of thing's really interesting, is that, saying, but we have the system we've got in place. I really like your response. A lot of this is labor laws. I used to be a film entertainment lawyer many years ago, and I've never seen copyright really benefit creators unless you're a super duper a successful one. And I also liked your comment about, how does CC work in the world when we're dealing with Indigenous culture? It can be very complicated, particularly in places like Australia, where there's a lot of the cultural issues and that is women's business, that is not kind of something to be shared. So the respect thing is something that is that we're trying to sort of deal with all the time. And Creative Commons did it initially with the attribution, and so you do get a bit of pushback about how do we deal with Indigenous cultural property, how do we ensure the respect, and not all things are appropriate to be shared either. So the appropriation thing. So that's something I think we are sensitive to and working through, but it's, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to it. Jennie, what do you think we should be paying attention to, or focusing a bit more on over the next 20 years?
Do you mean Creative Commons or
Creative Commons?
Okay.
Or us, or you can be bigger. You don't have to be just focused on CC.
Well, I'm gonna vigorously agree with Leela in saying that I feel like there is this almost big question mark in many cases around what should we do about in copyright work that remains undigitized, there's maybe a chilling effect around digitization, where there might be a commercial interest or might not be, and particularly for libraries and cultural heritage institutions and organizations, I don't know if Creative Commons licensing is the right solution for that. I really don't. I think that there is a level of clarification in the ways in which people share that needs to happen, but I don't know if it necessarily needs to be through Creative Commons licenses. I think that the rise of open educational resources in certain domains is really, really useful. But again, for literature, and one thing that I really don't like to discount is that there is a role that pleasure and joy can play in all of this. So I think sometimes when we talk about opening up resources, we're talking about science, and we're talking about, we're not talking about like entertainment necessarily. And I want to make sure that, because Disney released The Mandalorian only on streaming, that means that there is not a chance that you can see it if you do not have streaming. This creates enormous issues for access. This creates enormous issues for accessibility. This creates enormous issues for equity, right? And I don't think that, we should say like, well, The Mandalorian, is that really that important? Yeah, it is an important cultural touchstone and an important cultural text for many people. That being said, I also want to agree with Kaitlin that, the questions of, can I put my pictures on Flickr? Like, I took down my blog several years ago that had early writing from when I had first, started thinking about open access, and not because it was embarrassing, which it was a little embarrassing, but also because, it had a number of personally identifiable pieces about myself, and I thought it would be better if it just wasn't there. And so what I'm interested in is the ways in which Creative Commons can evolve with both the ways in which media has changed on the web. I was actually just having a really excellent conversation with Sarah Hutton and Max Warda, who presented earlier in the summit, about their work on streaming and environmental impact. The fact that we're all expected to be streaming media right now, it doesn't work for most people in the world. And also, it requires an enormous amount of bandwidth that hasn't really been quantified or even thought about in terms of its long-term environmental impact. And so to ask people who want to share, libraries and cultural heritage institutions and knowledge institutions, and to tell them that they must stream, is creating enormous equity questions. So what I'm wondering is, how can Creative Commons begin to answer these questions of, the media landscape has changed in the last 20 years in a big way. And so how is Creative Commons able to change with that media landscape? I think, and also not to fall prey to the publisher arguments where they claim that they're standing for creators' rights or for researchers' rights, when really what they're standing for is the rights of entrenched rights holders and the rights of corporations and the rights of, the people who already hold the keys. You look at what's happened in all sorts of publishing industries with consolidation. Kyle Courtney has a great chart where he says it used to be 20 legal publishers, even when he was coming up in the law. It's now 5. So how are we addressing this as a community? And how are we addressing the fact that even questions of can you copyright the law are starting to really become clearer, and the questions of digital ownership remain still a little hazy in most places. So that was a long way of saying that I hope that Creative Commons is able to address the threats, both in terms of real harms and also increasing market consolidation and increasing corporatization of media landscapes in a way that I don't think many of us, well, I definitely didn't see coming because I was quite young 20 years ago, but I don't think that many people really saw coming, particularly as I think many of us, when we first encountered this community and encountered this concept, became super starry-eyed and were like, yes, I will share everything. So what does it mean to pull that back or to pull it forward, right? I think that there are really brilliant people in this community who are working on these questions. And I think it is important and crucial that we listen and that the organization listens, particularly to folks who are not from North America and who are not necessarily in possession of a fast bandwidth connection.
Yeah, that's true. Kaitlin, you want to say something? Listen.
I was going to say, just to build on what Jenny had said, because I do think that consolidation and also the commercialization of open. So, in the open access space, majority of like the big for-profit closed publishers are making serious revenue off open access prints, right? And I think even probably one of the most ironic elements was Elsevier, which is one of the largest and bigger giants in the space, saying that they wanted to get into the diamond open access business, which it makes your head explode, right? And so to me, there's a broader question about, and there's again similar analogs when you're talking about content in many different forms, whether it's in book publishing, whether it's in other sorts of elements and, data sets, especially all of that, the open washing. Yeah. To really think about, and this is something we are thinking quite strongly about when it comes to how do we fund like sustainable open solutions and also shift from these, well, I chose this technology because of efficiency and I'm compromising by giving away all of my data and all of the access there and what have you for ease of use, right? What does reciprocity look like? And who's going to hold some of these organizations to account for the fact that they're deriving significant revenue off of open content and the open ecosystem and not giving back? There have been calls for, and there's a great example in the scientific computing space with the Python community, Anaconda, who, have paid services and are a for-profit company building off of some of the IPython notebook space in the Jupyter ecosystem, announced that 10% of their dividends they were going to be allocating through a nonprofit fiscal sponsor called NumFocus that they're also associated with, funds to go back into the community. Now, that's just one example, but what would it look like if for these big publishers, even in the research space, 10% of the value they derived off of open publishing, they put into a community fund and had a stakeholder governed means of investing back into the space as good citizens? What does that reciprocity look like? And I think we need to start having that conversation. I think it's long overdue, and really seeing what it looks like for Creative Commons to do that as well. Go ahead, Delia.
I mean, for me as well, and that's it. You're speaking my language. We're kind of so there's a lot of challenges ahead, interesting paths that we can support with other organizations. We don't always have to be the leader, but we can certainly be strong supporters, but some things we'll need to be leading on. I think that's all really good things. But let's just think about, just to turn it a little bit more positive, because the thing is there's lots of more work that we can do. I'm always amazed that we're still around at 20 years. I think, and the fact that how well known and adopted Creative Commons licenses in the organization is. I just want to be a little bit more positive, because like sometimes at a party recently, and someone was like just overwhelmed that I was a part of Creative Commons, but also on the board. And it was like I was Mick Jagger, you know, like this person could barely talk to me. They were just so excited about how amazing Creative Commons was. And like, you know, and you, sometimes you can still think to yourself, it's just so amazing that the impact it has made everywhere. And I see it all around the world, but it's just, you know, that's kind of that thank you Cable, but it's what we do, which is amazing. So what's going to excite you about what we're doing over the next 5 and 10 years? Wider kind of concept. What is exciting you? What's keeping you in the fight? What's keeping you here? I can start with Jenny again, or later.
Women. It's you women and all the other women and men and gender non-binary, everybody that are in this movement. For me, it is, you know, access to information is like, well, access for who? It's the people, right? So really, for me, at the end of the day, the whole thing boils down to the people and the human beings that are impacted by the work, and the people that we get to do it with. And so for me, like, I'm going to be a part of this community for the rest of my life. I mean, I just know that I will. And so, like, you know, I'll just stop there because I'm gushing a little, but I just want to say, like, it really has been so incredible to be a part of this community. And sort of, I know what you mean, Delia, with the like, oh, you're, you know, like you get that sort of like rock star cool factor by being part of Creative Commons. And I think that is an incredible thing to build in a mere 20 years. That is actually a really big deal, and should absolutely be celebrated and championed.
Yeah. Jenny, what excites you over the next 5 to 10 years? What keeps you here?
Oof. Funny. Same as Leela in many ways. I mean, I stepped back for a lot of reasons. Shortly after my mother passed in 2019. One thing I think that is bears mentioning, as somebody who has worked in open and with global communities for a long time, is that when one of the things that online conferencing provides us is that we're able to do this from our homes. I was in Lisbon and my mother was quite ill and passed away a few months later. And so one of the reasons why I took a step back was because I couldn't do that level of travel anymore. For me, it was not possible because I was caretaking for somebody who is very ill. And so I do think that bears mentioning, because I think that that's a particular issue that affects women in an outsized way, is the question of caretaking, is the question of, you know, what does online participation enable that maybe in-person participation does not. And as much as this year has been really tough and there has been an enormous amount of death and really pain, frankly. I also think that when we think about the future and we think about what does online participation and communication look like, I do think that it is important to consider, you know, that we are all able to have this conversation with Delia in Australia. I don't even want to think about what time it is for you there, and Kaitlin in Brooklyn, and Lila in the Bay, and me in Boston. And so, so that's just one thing. Put that aside. But some things that I'm excited about is I was actually very excited to see the Creative Commons strategy for the next 5 years. Again, I'm really excited about thinking about the ways that our open communities can approach the issues of the internet as a whole. So rather than thinking about, you know, the quote unquote techlash as being the primary way in which we think about technology right now, is to really think about the ways in which the internet reflects real life and the ways in which we can, as open communities, really bring some of the real excitement and I just described as starry-eyedness that we all had when we first started in these communities. And also really rethink paradigms around sharing and around, getting together and gathering and convening groups of people in new and really imaginative ways. And I do think that's one of the things that Creative Commons has always brought. And one of the things that I was really excited to help foster when I was there is this sense of fun and design and creativity that better sharing and better commons and better communities really can foster.
Wow. Thank you, Jenny. And Kaitlin, what keeps you here, and what's exciting you for the next 5 or 10 years? I actually can't even think of 10 years. 5 is enough. I can't even think of time. Time is it's a concept that seems to have disappeared through the pandemic.
That is very true. I mean, I think to Jenny's point, just quickly about, the ways in which we work having shifted, and also what the past 18 months has kind of shown. I will also say that on two sides. One, and this also is emblematic in the strategy for CC and better sharing moving forward, but how we are imbuing care and really not taking a no for an answer, like in terms of better imbuing care and those considerations about the situational context of the work that we do, and how, beyond just moving forward a strategy, moving forward a mission, like what does that impact look like? I think we've seen a level of vulnerability and a level of openness and a level of community in even the most bizarre settings, based on how the pandemic has wreaked havoc in various parts of our lives, that I know I'm not looking to necessarily go back to the ways that they were before, in terms of power structures, in terms of expectations of, whether or not childcare, falls through. Am I still expected to do certain things? Things that not only led to burnout, but also the care of individuals at all levels within organizations and in the broader community, and how the work reflects that. The other thing, just to be like a little punchier, because, I've got a lot of coffee running through my veins. I think that, kind of reflecting back from 15 years ago when I was starting on this journey with CC to where I am now, I am bolder and more willing to take risk to imbue care and transparency and authenticity in the work that we do, and ensure that everything that we do is sort of research-based and engaging with community to ensure that feedback is there. But if it makes individuals uncomfortable because the system needs to change, much more willing to push on that. And if we have to shut it down in 3 years, we'll do that, because we can't keep being beholden to the systems that are not serving individuals, because they're just, they feel immovable. I think that we're underestimating our collective power on that. And so that, I think, in terms of being frustrated with the status quo and putting that to good use, that really excites me, because I know that there are a number of other organizations and individuals, both new organizations and groups like CC, that are reflecting on the next 5, 10, 20 years ahead, that are supercharged going into that fight. And I'm excited to be alongside them.
I have to say, I 100% agree with you about that. We do underestimate the power of our collective passion, and the fact that we have many allies yet to work with and to bring into our fold, or to be in their fold or our fold. I've always said that it's about collective action and sharing the knowledge and intelligence with others. I mean, obviously what my experience might be in Australia or working in copyright law reform may not be directly, may be helpful on a wider scale, but all that sort of stuff. So I think that is a really, again, it gets back to the power of the network, power of the community, power of working with each other across oceans and time zones and languages and cultures and social mores. So I really, really agree with you on that. And I just want to also just thank all of you. You've just been incredibly inspiring in your sharing of your ideas and your passions and your experience with everybody. I think that's been absolutely fantastic. I know I've only got 5 minutes left for questions here, but I just really wanted to look down here. Has anyone got any questions for any of our fabulous panelists. I mean, there was that one question about what we think CC's role would be with climate change that came up from Francis. Has anyone else got any questions they want to pop into the chat they want to put to our panelists? Because I want to be selfish and just like take the entire time me asking questions. So I'm just looking in there to see if anyone's got that. But if not, I do have probably another sort of wrap-up question, because we are here celebrating the women in Creative Commons, and this has been a wonderful thing that we've been doing for the past few summits. I mean, who's your kind of idol and mentor, and within that's let's celebrate a female idol and mentor. Who would be your mentor or idol that you want to sort of pay respect to, or acknowledge, or say, hey?
I mean, so Delia, for me, you are like my most obvious answer, honestly.
You don't say me.
Well, I mean,
that's lovely.
I just feel like, when I was back in the day, you just took me under your wing and were just so welcoming and taught me so much. Not only about how it works in Australia, but how Creative Commons works as a global network, and just really your friendship and your openness and your willing and you're just like telling it how it is always, no matter what, has always just really impressed me. And so you are a big inspiration and a mentor to me. And I also want to say, just to sort of, so like Delia's been there since the very beginning, and I just want to say here in this moment to say that I'm so delighted to know Catherine Styler now. I did not know anything about her until she became the CEO, but we've been working together, and I'm just so thrilled by her version of leadership, and I'm so excited to see where she's going to take this organization. So I just wanted to say, like, really thrilled to have more women coming in and women staying in, and all of it.
That's very generous of you. Molly's added another interesting thing there about hearing about your mentees, your mentors, your idol mentor, but also about your mentees who are new to the movement. One about Kaitlin. Oh,
see if I can actually unmute. There we go. This one's tough. I will say that because there weren't a ton of women in science under the age of 35, let alone 50, when we were doing this sort of work. I will get to the female mentees, but I also have to say that Hal Abelson, Jamie Boyle, Mike Carroll, and John Wilbanks were like instrumental in making sure I was prepared for the level of scrutiny of being a woman that was younger, going and speaking in traditionally male-dominated spaces. That was, in many cases, a place that did not always feel safe, and they made sure that I was prepared, that I was supported, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I hope that is not what we need to train others in the same sort of way, but just a huge shout out for their foresight there. I will also say that in terms of individuals in the space, both mentors and mentees, Danielle Robinson, who's a head of Code for Science and Society, where I'm not only on the board, but also now lucky enough to be a fiscally sponsored project. She was one of my former Mozilla fellows and is now leading very authentically an organization that imbues care and openness and leadership and support for a broad variety of projects. And so it's one of those amazing examples where I continue to learn from her, but it also has come full circle. And I think that is really important as well in terms of looking at ways in which we can pay that forward.
Excellent.
I'll hand it over to Jennie.
Yeah, come on, Jennie.
So I feel very lucky to have been nurtured by all the women on this panel, as well as by Catherine. I've had a close relationship with the first librarian I ever really got to know, who is Jenna Friedman, who's the zine librarian at Barnard College, which is where I first encountered a lot of the free culture ideas that I have spent my career working with, and a lot of the sort of radical out there punk communities that I have also been nurtured by. Yes, if zine librarianship is a burgeoning field, it's really an exciting space, and I owe really everything to Jenna. We talk frequently, and when people know her in a session, they're like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." But so as far as mentors go, Jenna is forever. But I also really do feel lucky to have been nurtured by all of you, particularly as somebody who is a younger ED who was sort of tapped on the shoulder. As like, do you want to try a strategy? Well, do you want to actually just do this thing? And now it's been really a very, very exciting 10 months. And to be honest, I really see most of my relationships as being a two-way street, like Kaitlin, as well as just I know, right? I'm not that young. Excuse me. So I actually really do see a lot of this as being a two-way street. I've had the opportunity and joy to work with a lot of folks within the Library Futures community who are really doing the work of controlled digital lending, who are really doing the on-the-ground work with patrons and with user communities, and getting to know a whole new group of folks who I did not have as much opportunity to interact with at Creative Commons, who are now, or in my role at Harvard, where I also felt very nurtured by many of the librarians there. You know, it's been wonderful to get to help build this community and learn from everybody there, and learn much more about patron needs and the systems that people use every day, that I might not have necessarily been exposed to in my work as a librarian or in my work in the open movement. Again, long way of saying, I feel nurtured by most of the people I get to interact with. And I feel like that makes me, in many ways, one of the most fortunate people within this space. I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background who's about to go for a walk.
Everybody have a dog. Everybody, a pandemic dog or a dog, anyway. Look, we've come to the end. We're actually running 2 minutes as a common thread. We probably need to do a Creative Commons dog calendar in the future, I think. So I just want to thank everybody for their time today. This was a fantastic 2 dogs named Zelda too. You're kidding. After Fitzgerald? Of course. Hope they haven't got alcohol problems. So, sorry, couldn't help that. I just want to thank the panelists today. I have super enjoyed this session. It's been fantastic and very deep, which has been fantastic, and also very loving and positive. It was worth getting out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning to talk to you 3, and I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you.
And what you do for all of us. It's been fantastic. I feel incredibly positive, which is a great day to say to Friday. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Delia.